The power went out just as I was halfway through grilling steaks on my back porch. At first, I thought it was a blown fuse. But then I heard music, loud, thumping, DJ-style music from 2 houses down. I walked around the side of my house and followed the extension cord I always used for my power tools. It was missing. No, not missing, yanked right out of my garage and dragged across my lawn like a leash. And there it was, plugged into a tangled mess of power strips behind a rented cotton candy machine in Patricia Dorsey's front yard. Patricia, the HOA president, stood by her pink balloon arch in a sequined sun hat, sipping rose like she owned the whole street. She probably thought she did. Everyone in the neighborhood called her Patty. Unless they were mad at her then, it was Karen. I marched straight up to her, dodging a kid with a face full of glitter. "Patricia, that's my power cable," I said. "You unplugged my garage. I was using that." She didn't even blink. "Oh, Oliver. It's just for a few hours. We needed extra power for the snow cone machine. You weren't using it for anything important." "I was cooking dinner," I said. "You can't just steal electricity." She waved her hand like I was talking about the weather. "Well, HOA events benefit the whole community. You should be happy to contribute." I looked around. There was no notice about a party. No HOA email. Nothing. This was her own private bash with her garden club friends and their sugar-charged grandkids. And now I had no power in half my house. I gave her one last chance. "Unplug it, Patricia. Now." She pursed her lips. "Oliver, I'm the HOA president. If you want to file a complaint, you know where to send it." I turned and walked away without another word. Back at my house, I flipped every breaker. No luck. The whole side of my house was dead. I couldn't charge my phone, couldn't finish dinner, couldn't even start my backup generator because she'd taken the only extension cord long enough to reach the shed. That's when I called the police. Not the non-emergency line. I called the real thing. Theft of utilities. Trespassing. Tampering with residential power. When the officer showed up 20 minutes later, I was standing in my driveway with my arms crossed. The music was still blasting. Patricia was now dancing with a guy who looked like he'd been bribed with funnel cake. The cop walked up beside me. "You the one who called?" "Yeah," I said, pointing. "That's my extension cord. She unplugged my house and used it to power her party." He looked at the cord, followed it with his eyes up to the cotton candy machine, then turned back to me. "You want to press charges?" I nodded. "Yes, I do." He didn't waste any time. Patricia didn't notice the officer until he was standing almost shoulder to shoulder with her, watching the cotton candy machine spin a pale blue cloud. She turned, startled, spilling a bit of her drink on her espadrilles. "Ma'am," the officer said, "I need you to shut down everything being powered by that cord. Now." Her genteel party face cracked, just slightly. "Excuse me? I'm hosting a sanctioned neighborhood gathering. I have every right to." He cut her off. "You're drawing power from a private residence without permission. That's felony utility theft. I need you to unplug that cord immediately." The music stuttered as the DJ noticed the badge. The laughter wavered. Someone snapped a selfie while pretending not to look like they were. Patricia's friends began to inch away from the snack tables. She leaned in toward the officer, like she was about to read him a bedtime story. "Officer, I am the HOA president. I've hosted dozens of events. This is for the community." He didn't move. "Doesn't change the law. You're not authorized to reroute someone else's electricity. You entered private property to take that cable. That's trespassing on top of theft." "I didn't break into anything," she said, her tone sharpening as the facade cracked further. "The garage was open. It was just sitting there." The officer raised an eyebrow. "So was the neighbor's car. Would you take that too if the keys were in it?" She opened her mouth, closed it, and swiveled to look at me standing at the edge of the driveway. "You could have just said no," she hissed. I didn't blink. "You didn't ask." The officer turned back to her. "Unplug it." Now. There was a long pause. Then, with a jerky movement, Patricia stormed across the lawn and yanked the cord herself. The cotton candy machine died mid-spin. The DJ's speakers cut out. The inflatable bounce house sagged like a tired lung. The kids wailed. One of the older neighbors whispered, "Finally," and walked off with a Jell-O mold. The officer followed Patricia back toward the sidewalk. "I'll need your ID." She froze. "What?" "You're being cited for utility theft and criminal trespass. You'll receive a court summons." Her voice pitched up. "You can't be serious. I'm a respected figure in this neighborhood. I'm not here for your resume, ma'am. ID now." She fumbled through her sequined handbag, handed over her license, and stood rigid while he radioed in her details. Her cheeks flushed bright red as the neighbors quietly drifted away, some pretending to check their mail, others flat out gawking. Even the DJ had packed up his laptop and was halfway to his car. I retrieved my cord without a word and walked back toward my house. I didn't feel triumphant. Not yet. I felt something simmering deeper, something I'd almost forgotten about after years of tolerating little power grabs, subtle fines, and veiled threats tucked inside HOA newsletters. I wasn't the only one who'd had run-ins with Patricia. I just happened to be the first one who called the cops. Inside, I plugged the cord back into the generator and flipped the switch. The garage lights flickered on. The fridge hummed. I looked over at the wall where I kept a lockbox of old paperwork, property records, HOA bylaws, city ordinances. I hadn't cracked it open in years, but I would tonight. The next morning, I woke to an email from the HOA board. The subject line read, "Incident at community event." It was written in passive voice like every bad apology. "An unfortunate misunderstanding occurred during yesterday's gathering. We regret any inconvenience caused by the temporary use of a neighbor's equipment. The board will review protocols for future events." No mention of trespassing. No admission of wrongdoing. Not a word about the citation or the police involvement. I hit print. By noon, I'd made 7 copies. That afternoon, I walked up to Mr. and Mrs. Kwan's house 2 doors down. They'd lived here since the Reagan years and had lost 2 rose bushes last spring when the HOA's landscaper mowed over their garden during a beautification initiative. I handed them a folder. Then I visited the Morales family across the street. Their son had been fined last month for parking his college car in their own driveway unsightly, according to Patricia. They got a folder too. One by one, I made my way down the block. I didn't preach. I didn't rant. I just handed over the documentation, Patricia's citation number, the city code she violated, her email to the HOA board where she tried to sweep it all under the rug. By the time the sun went down, I had 17 signatures on my petition to call a vote of no confidence in the HOA president. We needed 21. The next morning, I got a text from Lisa, the ER nurse who lived at the end of the cul-de-sac. She'd gotten fined last year for having her garbage bins out too early, even though she'd been working a double shift during a COVID surge. "I'm in," she said when I knocked. 20. At lunch, I dropped by Reggie's house. He was a retired Marine with a German Shepherd and a razor-straight lawn. Patricia had once tried to make him remove his front yard flagpole because it disrupted the visual harmony. He took one look at the petition and said, "Where do I sign?" 21. That evening, I sent a certified letter to the HOA's board secretary requesting a special meeting under Article 6, Section D of the bylaws, removal of officers. I attached the signatures and cited the clause allowing members to call for an emergency vote if more than 20% of the community demanded it. 3 minutes later, I got a call. It was Patricia. "I assume you think this is funny," she said. "I think it's legal," I replied. "You're making a mistake. I've done more for this neighborhood than anybody. And now you've done enough. You want to destroy everything we've built?" "No," I said. "I want it to stop being built on threats and favoritism." She hung up. 2 days later, The board posted the notice. Emergency HOA meeting. Thursday. Community clubhouse. 6 p.m. I spent the rest of the week preparing. I didn't just want Patricia out, I wanted the bylaws amended so no one could pull stunts like hers again. I dug through public records, printed out property maps, and even pulled screenshots from the city's crime reporting site, showing how our neighborhood's complaints had spiked since she took over. I practiced my opening remarks. Just the facts. Nothing emotional. I knew Patricia would try to spin it all as a smear campaign. But facts, when laid out properly, don't need embellishment. Thursday arrived with unseasonably clear skies. The clubhouse filled up fast. More people than I'd ever seen at a board meeting. Some brought lawn chairs. A few had clipboards. One guy brought popcorn. When Patricia walked in, she was wearing a navy blazer and a pin that said Hope. She looked like she was running for office. She stood behind the folding table at the front, flanked by two board members who looked like they'd just found out they were sitting on a landmine. "Let's begin," she said, tapping a gavel. I stood up. Point of order. As per the petition submitted and verified, the community has called for a vote of no confidence in the sitting president, effective immediately. She paled. Motion seconded. Lisa called from the back. The room murmured. Discussion. Patricia asked, her voice tight. I stepped to the front and handed out packets. Included are publicly available records of a utility theft citation issued to the current president. Also included are HOA emails mischaracterizing the event and an itemized list of previous abuses of power documented by residents. One by one, neighbors stood up. Mr. Kwan spoke about the garden. Lisa brought up the garbage bin fine. Reggie read aloud the flagpole notice. Even the DJ from the party had sent in a statement. He hadn't been paid. When the vote came, it wasn't even close. Out of the 56 households in the HOA, 49 voted to remove Patricia as president. The rest abstained. Not a single person supported her. She stood, trembling, and walked out without a word. The gavel passed to Lisa. She looked around the room and said, "First order of business, let's change the rule that lets one person approve events without notifying residents." Applause broke out. I didn't clap. I just sat back, folded my arms, and looked down at the cord in my backpack, the one she'd stolen. It was locked now, just like the garage door. By the following Monday, a quiet tension hung over the neighborhood. Lawns still got mowed, sprinklers still ticked on at dawn, and kids still coasted down the sidewalks on scooters, but something had shifted. For the first time in years, the community wasn't just enduring the rules from above. They had realized they could change them. Lisa, now interim president, asked me to help form a temporary oversight committee until a formal election could be held. I didn't want a title, but I agreed to help draft the reforms. The bylaws hadn't been updated in over a decade, and there were loopholes big enough to drive a dump truck through. That's how I found it. Buried in the financial disclosures stashed in a password-protected spreadsheet the treasurer had reluctantly forwarded me, I noticed a series of reimbursements labeled Community Operations. Several of them had the same vendor name, Dorsey Services, LLC. At first, it didn't click. But then I remembered Patricia's husband, Gary, ran a small landscaping and maintenance business. The same one that had been hired to beautify our neighborhood entrance last spring and again for seasonal cleanup in the fall. I cross-checked the payments against the HOA board meeting minutes. No mention of any formal vote or bidding process. Just vague approvals for vendor maintenance expenses. I pulled the bank statements the treasurer had provided under duress. The totals were staggering. Over the last 18 months, Dorsey Services had received nearly $40,000 in HOA funds. I picked up the phone and called Lisa. She answered on the second ring. "I was just about to email you. The printer's still down, but I got the draft revisions on my phone. Forget the printer." "We have a bigger problem," I said, and told her what I'd found. There was a pause. How sure are you? She asked. I triple-checked the vendor ID numbers.
It's them.
She's been routing HOA funds to her husband's company without disclosing the relationship or holding a single vote. That's self-dealing, and if she signed any of those checks herself, it might be embezzlement. Lisa exhaled slowly. We need a forensic accountant. I already called one, I said. Retired auditor lives 3 streets over. He's been waiting for a reason to get involved. 3 days later, Mr. Halvorsen, white-bearded, hawk-eyed, and with a calculator older than most laptops, walked into the community clubhouse with a stack of printed ledgers and a legal pad full of notes. He laid everything out on the long folding table like he was prepping for a courtroom exhibit. She created a shell account, he said. Payments were routed through a dummy P.O. box in town, then reissued to Dorsey Services. She tried to disguise it with generic service descriptions, but the routing numbers match. Lisa leaned forward. Is it criminal? If she didn't disclose the conflict of interest and approve the payments herself, which she did, I checked the bank signatures, then yes. That's fraud. And if she used any of it for personal expenses, it gets worse. He tapped a highlighted line on one of the statements. This one here? Event supplies reimbursement? That was 3 days before the Garden Club wine tasting last fall. She reimbursed herself over $800.
Lisa looked at me.
Get everything copied. We're calling the sheriff. This time, the response came from a different department. 2 detectives from the county's Financial Crimes Division arrived the following morning. They weren't in uniform, plain clothes, notepads, digital recorders. They asked for everything: meeting minutes, financial ledgers, emails, the full account history. I handed over a USB drive. Have any residents brought this to law enforcement before? One of them asked. No, Lisa said. Until last week, no one knew. The taller detective nodded. We'll need to speak with the former president. Do you know her current whereabouts? She lives 3 blocks down, I said. Still in the same house. They left without further comment. By evening, word had spread. A county car had parked outside Patricia's home for over an hour. Neighbors whispered over fences. Someone posted anonymously on the community message board, and within minutes, the thread exploded. People started sharing stories: repairs that had been promised and never completed, fees that had mysteriously increased, checks that had taken months to clear. The next morning, Lisa called an emergency meeting. It wasn't held at the clubhouse. It was held outside, on the green belt near the playground, where more people could gather without worrying about seating. Over 70 residents showed up. Lisa stood on a folding crate with a bullhorn. We've turned over all financial documentation to law enforcement, she said. There is an ongoing investigation into potential misuse of HOA funds by the former president. No one gasped. No one looked surprised. They just listened. We'll be appointing a temporary treasurer with full transparency. All contracts going forward will be subject to open bidding. And we're establishing an independent audit committee made up of residents. Someone asked whether Patricia could be sued.
Lisa paused.
That would depend on the outcome of the investigation. But if funds were misused, yes, we can pursue civil recovery. The crowd murmured approval. Later that week, I received a call from one of the detectives. We've confirmed Dorsey Services was operated entirely by her husband, but she was listed as co-owner on the business license, he said. That means she's signed for both sides of the contract, requesting and approving payment. That's direct conflict of interest under state nonprofit law. What happens now? I asked. We're submitting the case to the district attorney's office. She could face charges of wire fraud, embezzlement, and falsifying financial records. Depending on the total amount and the DA's determination, it could be felony level. I thanked him and hung up. 2 days later, Patricia's property had a for sale sign in the yard. She didn't show her face again.
No budie. No explanaste. Nothing.
But the house didn't sell right away. Prospective buyers likely did their homework, and when they did, They found public records indicating an ongoing investigation tied to the HOA's finances. Meanwhile, the neighborhood changed. For the better. People started attending meetings, volunteering for committees, offering to help with landscaping, cleanup days, even organizing their own events. Lisa led with openness. The new treasurer and accounting professor named Naomi posted monthly financial updates on a shared drive. Everything was transparent. No more secret reimbursements. No more unapproved spending. At one meeting, someone asked Lisa if she planned to run for president permanently. "No," she said. "I just wanted to fix what went wrong." The election was scheduled for spring. I didn't run either. I didn't want power, I just wanted the rules to mean something again. One evening, as I was pulling weeds from the side of my driveway, Reggie passed by with his dog.
He stopped.
Heard they froze her accounts.
Yeah.
DA's office confirmed they're building the case. He nodded. Never thought I'd see the day. I stood. Me neither. He looked around the street quiet, calm, for once not bristling with silent resentment. "You started something, you know." "I just pulled a cord," I said. He laughed. "Pulled the whole operation apart with it." We shook hands. Across the street, a group of teenagers was setting up folding tables for a block party. No emails from the HOA.
No mandatory fees.
Just grilled food, folding chairs, and music someone burned onto a playlist. No cotton candy machine. No hidden extension cords. And for the first time in a long while, nobody was worried about a fine. It was nearly 2 months since Patricia had quietly vanished from the neighborhood and from the public eye altogether. Her house still hadn't sold. The blinds stayed drawn, the garden beds grew wild, and the mailbox, once a polished brass statement of her taste, sagged on one hinge. A few neighborhood kids had taken to tossing pebbles at her for sale by owner sign on their way home from school. No one stopped them. Meanwhile, the audit committee had uncovered more than anyone expected. Naomi, the new treasurer, called me late one evening. She rarely contacted anyone outside of official HOA channels unless it was critical. "I need you to come by," she said.
Now.
I arrived at her house 15 minutes later. Her dining table was covered in folders, receipts, and a single worn ledger with a cracked spine. She pushed it toward me. "Patricia didn't just funnel money into her husband's company," she said. "She created an entire system of fake vendors, some with made-up addresses, others registered to post office boxes in neighboring counties." I flipped through a few pages. The handwriting varied, like someone had gone to great lengths to make the entries appear distinct. But the payment structures were too similar, even dollar amounts, recurring on the same dates, and always approved with the same check signature. Naomi pointed to a list of transactions labeled security consulting. "That one supposedly hired to install surveillance cameras around the neighborhood? Doesn't exist." I called the number disconnected. The business license was revoked 3 years ago. I leaned back in the chair. "How much?" She didn't hesitate. "Over 80,000. Across 17 months. It wasn't just embezzlement. This is fraud on a scale that touches every household." I stared at the folders, the falsified invoices, the fake vendor names. "Does the sheriff know yet?" I sent everything to the detective handling the case. He called me this afternoon and said he's escalating it to the State Financial Crimes Unit. They're bringing in a prosecutor. The following week, a team of state investigators showed up in 3 unmarked cars. They didn't knock on doors or speak to residents. They went straight to the records Lisa had preserved at the clubhouse and requested copies of the HOA's bank access logs. They were professionals, cordial but stone-faced. One of them, a woman in a gray blazer with a badge clipped to her belt, asked me if I'd be willing to give a statement. We sat in the community room, beside the vending machine that never worked. "You were the first to report suspicious activity," she asked, flipping open a tablet. "I just wanted my power back," I said. "The rest came later." She nodded. "You also circulated a petition to remove her from office?"
Yes.
But that was before we knew about the money. Had you ever seen her access the HOA's financial records prior to this? I saw her carry the ledger once during a meeting last year. She said she needed to double-check something and took it home. That same week, we were charged for a landscaping service that never happened. She tapped in notes with measured precision. We believe she created multiple layers of fake documentation to move funds through shell companies. If we can prove intent, this becomes a felony case with potential prison time. What happens if she's already moved the money? I asked. We're tracking her banking activity and assets. If she converted HOA funds into personal property vehicles, real estate, anything, we can seize it. The next day, a white notice appeared taped to Patricia's front door. It bore the state seal and read, "Property under active investigation. Do not enter without authorization." The neighborhood watched in silence as a locksmith, flanked by 2 agents, opened her front door. They were inside for hours. One carried out a desktop computer tower wrapped in a clear bag. Another wheeled out 2 filing boxes, both sealed with evidence tape. Lisa and Naomi stood with me at the end of the cul-de-sac. She had a safe in the garage, Naomi said. The locksmith bypassed it in under 5 minutes. You think she stashed cash? Lisa asked. Or documents she didn't want found, I added. That evening, a town hall was called not just for HOA members, but for the entire community. It wasn't held at the clubhouse. This time, the mayor himself arranged for us to use the municipal auditorium. He stood at the podium, flanked by the city council and the lead investigator from the Financial Crimes Unit. This is not just a matter of neighborhood politics, the mayor said. This is a case of organized financial misconduct that directly harmed dozens of families. The investigator stepped up. We've gathered sufficient evidence to charge Patricia Dorsey with multiple counts of felony fraud, embezzlement, and falsification of public records. We've issued a warrant for her arrest. A murmur rippled through the crowd. She fled the state 10 days ago, the agent continued. But we've located her in Arizona. She's currently in custody awaiting extradition. Lisa spoke next. We've begun the process of recovering stolen funds through civil litigation. Any recovered assets will be redirected into community improvements voted on by the residents. There was no applause, just a collective exhale. The following week, I was called to testify before a state grand jury. So were Lisa, Naomi, and 2 former board members who had resigned under Patricia's leadership. We weren't allowed to discuss the proceedings, but afterward, the prosecutor thanked us personally. You're the reason this case has legs, she said to me. Most HOA fraud never sees the light of day. People get scared, or tired, or just give up. You didn't. I almost did, I replied. But then she unplugged my house. She blinked, then smiled, not out of amusement, but with something close to respect. 3 months later, the trial began. The courtroom was packed. Local news crews lined the back row. Patricia, thinner now, with her hair grayer and pulled into a tight bun, sat at the defense table in a beige suit. Her attorney tried to argue that the payments were bookkeeping errors, that she'd intended to reimburse the HOA, that no harm was done. Then Naomi took the stand. She walked the jury through every false vendor, every forged invoice, every check Patricia had signed to herself or her husband's company. The prosecutor followed with bank statements showing luxury purchases, a new SUV, a Caribbean vacation, and jewelry bought weeks after the biggest maintenance payouts. When I testified, I was asked only one question. What made you think something was wrong? I looked at Patricia. She didn't meet my eyes. She cut power to my house without asking, I said. Because she thought she could. That told me everything I needed to know. The jury took a day and a half to deliberate. Guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 8 years, with restitution ordered in full. Her remaining assets, what hadn't already been seized, were liquidated. The HOA received one final check from the state, half of what she stole, recovered through asset forfeiture. At the next neighborhood meeting, the check was presented in a plain folder. Lisa stood at the front of the clubhouse and held it up. "We're not going to build a fountain," she said. "We're fixing the sidewalks, repainting the curbs, and giving the park new equipment. Every dollar will go where it should have gone in the first place." The loudest applause came from the kids sitting cross-legged near the snack table. That spring, the HOA held its first competitive election in over a decade. 3 candidates ran on platforms of transparency, accountability, and community-led decision-making. I didn't vote for anyone based on promises. I voted for the one who showed up to every cleanup day, without being asked. On the morning the new president was sworn in, I walked out to my driveway and saw something that made me pause. The power cord Patricia had once stolen, the same one that started everything, was coiled neatly on my garage shelf. I hadn't used it since. I picked it up, checked the prongs, and plugged it into the outlet near my tool bench. The light above flickered on, steady and warm. I left it on.